distress beacon from Outpost Sierra reached Foundation Command at 3:42 hours on November 17th. The automated signal carried no voice transmission, no emergency code, nothing but the raw digital scream of a facility in crisis. Within 6 hours, Mobile Task Force Sigma-9, callsign Frostbiters, was wheels up from Site 19, bound for coordinates that placed them 300 kilometers inside the Arctic Circle. Dr. Elena Voss reviewed the mission parameters during the flight north, her tablet casting a pale glow across her angular features. Outpost Sierra was officially a meteorological research station, but that was the cover story. In reality, the facility monitored seismic anomalies beneath the Greenland ice sheet, anomalies that had shown disturbing patterns over the past 18 months. Rhythmic, almost deliberate. The Foundation had established Sierra 2 years ago after deep ice radar detected what appeared to be geometric structures buried beneath 3 kilometers of glacial ice. The team consisted of 5 members. Commander Marcus Webb led the tactical element, a 20-year Foundation veteran whose face carried the weathered lines of someone who had seen too many impossible things. His second was Agent Rachel Torres, a specialist in extreme environment operations who had survived the Foundation's disastrous expedition to SCP-2846 in Antarctica. Dr. Voss herself represented the scientific component, a glaciologist with Level 3 clearance and a particular expertise in ice-based anomalies. The remaining 2 were Agent David Park, communications and technical specialist, and Dr. James Holloway, a medical officer cross-trained in emergency trauma response. The helicopter dropped them 8 kilometers from Sierra's coordinates. The pilot, a contractor with no Foundation clearance beyond the basics, refused to go closer. He had pointed at his instruments with a shaking hand, showing them readings that made no sense. The temperature gauge fluctuated between -40 and -90 degrees Celsius. The compass spun lazily, unable to find north. The altimeter claimed they were simultaneously at sea level and 3,000 meters up. "This is as far as I go," the pilot had said, and Webb had not argued. Some instincts were worth respecting. They had been walking for 90 minutes when the whiteout hit. One moment, Voss could see the dark shapes of her team against the snow. The next, the world dissolved into a screaming white void. The wind did not merely blow, it shrieked, a sound that started low and rose to a pitch that felt almost human, almost pleading. Voss activated her radio but heard only static, punctuated by what might have been voices speaking in a language that hurt to hear. "Stay together," Webb's voice cut through the storm, muffled by his face mask. "Ropes, now." They connected themselves with climbing rope, each member spaced 3 meters apart. The temperature readout on Voss's wrist display showed -81 degrees Celsius. At that temperature, exposed skin would freeze in under 2 minutes. Moisture in their breath should have become ice crystals before it left their masks. The fact that they could breathe at all was their first indication that something was deeply wrong. "Electronics are failing," Park reported, his voice tight with controlled panic. "GPS is gone. Radio is intermittent. Even my flashlight is starting to dim." Voss looked at her own flashlight. The LED beam flickered, struggling against the oppressive darkness that somehow existed within the complete whiteness of the storm. It should not have been possible to have both at once, absolute light and absolute dark, occupying the same space. Yet here they were, walking through a contradiction made manifest. "There," Torres called out, pointing ahead. "Structure at 10 o'clock. The outline of Outpost Sierra emerged from the whiteout like a ship from fog. The facility was larger than Voss had expected, a sprawling complex of interconnected modules that should have been prefabricated steel and concrete. But as they drew closer, she realized the walls were not reflecting the weak beam of their failing flashlights. They were glowing with a faint luminescence from within, a cold blue-white radiance that pulsed with a rhythm that matched the seismic patterns from the reports. The entrance stood open. The airlock door, designed to seal automatically during emergencies, hung at an angle, its hinges sheathed in ice. Not frost, not snow. Clear, crystalline ice that looked like it had been grown rather than formed. Webb signaled them forward. They entered in tactical formation, weapons raised, though what good guns would do against whatever had happened here, Voss could not imagine. The interior of Outpost Sierra was wrong. The walls should have been white polymer panels over insulated steel. Instead, they were transparent ice, perfectly clear, like looking through the highest quality glass. Voss could see the layers, the structure of the facility extending away in all directions, rooms and corridors visible through the crystalline barriers like a cutaway diagram. Emergency lights glowed somewhere deep within the ice, their red glow diffused into a soft pink haze that made the entire structure look organic. Alive. Jesus Christ, Holloway whispered. The whole place has been converted. Not converted, Voss thought. Replaced. This was not ice that had formed over the original structure. This was ice that had become the structure, replacing it molecule by molecule, maintaining the exact shape and layout while transforming its fundamental nature. They moved deeper into the facility, their boots crunching on a floor that was solid ice yet provided perfect traction. The temperature inside was no warmer than outside, yet the wind had stopped. The silence pressed against Voss's ears like physical pressure, broken only by their breathing and the occasional crack of settling ice. "Commander," Taurus said, her voice carefully neutral. Movement in the walls. Voss turned and saw it. Deep within the ice, perhaps 10 meters back from the surface, something shifted. A dark shape, human-sized, suspended in the frozen matrix. As she watched, it moved again. Not the movement of something drifting in current, but deliberate, purposeful. Webb approached the wall, playing his dying flashlight across the surface. The beam penetrated deep, revealing more shapes, dozens of them scattered throughout the ice at varying depths. Some were close enough to make out details. They were people. The missing crew of Outpost Sierra, frozen in the glacier that had replaced their home. Voss stepped closer, her scientific training overriding her horror. The bodies were perfectly preserved, no ice crystals visible in the tissues, no signs of freezer burn or cellular damage. They looked like they could wake up at any moment. Like they were simply sleeping in a medium that happened to be frozen water instead of air. Then the nearest one opened its eyes. Voss jerked backward, colliding with Park. The figure in the ice, a woman in her 30s, wearing a Foundation researcher's jumpsuit, stared directly at them. Her eyes moved, tracking their positions. Her mouth opened slightly, as if trying to speak. Deep in the ice, her hand raised slowly, pressing against some invisible barrier. "They're alive," Holloway breathed. "Dear God, they're still alive in there." All around them, the frozen crew was waking up, eyes opening in the depths, hands moving, mouths forming words that could not escape their crystalline prison. Voss counted at least 20 individuals, scattered through the walls, floor, and ceiling. Some were close to the surface. Others were buried so deep they appeared as mere shadows in the blue-white glow. "We need to get them out," Taurus said, raising her weapon. "If I can break through—" "No," Voss interrupted. "Look at them. Really look." The woman in the wall was breathing. Voss could see her chest rise and fall, slow and regular, but there was no air in the ice, no space for lungs to expand. Yet the woman breathed anyway, her body performing functions that should have been impossible. Her eyes were not frozen, they were moist, alive, moving with normal fluidity despite being surrounded by ice that should have been at least -80 degrees. "They're not trapped in ice," Voss said slowly, working through the implications. "They've become part of it. The ice is not around them. It's integrated with them. They're existing in some kind of hybrid state." Webb moved to the nearest terminal, an ice-sheathed console that still glowed with active displays. The screen was frozen beneath a centimeter of transparent ice, but the readouts were still visible, still updating. He tapped the surface experimentally, and his gloved finger passed through a thin layer of frost to touch the actual screen beneath. "System still active," he reported. "Logs are still recording. Last entry was 3 hours ago." 3 hours? Park checked his watch. "The distress beacon went out 18 hours ago." Webb accessed the logs, scrolling through entries that became increasingly erratic. Voss read over his shoulder, her heart rate climbing as she processed the information. The transformation had begun 62 hours ago, during what the logs described as a seismic event of unprecedented magnitude. The sensors beneath the ice had detected massive movement, something rising from the deep strata. The temperature had plummeted instantly, from a normal -30 degrees to -80 in the span of seconds. Then the walls had started to change. The final entries were fragmentary, written by the station commander, a Dr. Sarah Chen, whose frozen body Voss had spotted suspended near the ceiling of the main corridor. The ice is not ice. It's something older, something that predates ice. We tried to seal the airlocks, but it came through anyway, replacing everything it touched. Jenkins tried to run and made it halfway to the surface entrance before it caught him. I can see him in the floor now, still moving, still aware. God help us, we're all still aware. It doesn't freeze you, it makes you part of it. I can feel it starting in my legs, creeping up. The cold doesn't hurt. That's the worst part. It feels like coming home. The log ended there. We need to leave, Holloway said flatly. Right now. Call for extraction and get the hell out of here before... The lights flickered, all of them simultaneously. The red emergency glow faded, then returned, then faded again. In the darkness between pulses, Voss saw that the frozen crew members were moving more actively now, pressing against their icy barriers, their faces twisted in expressions that might have been warning or might have been invitation. Park tried his radio. Nothing but static and that same almost voice speaking in frequencies that made Voss's teeth ache. Extraction is not an option, Webb said. We're 8 kilometers from the LZ, and the storm is getting worse. We'd never make it. As if to emphasize his point, the wind outside rose to a new pitch, a howl that resonated through the ice walls like they were inside some vast instrument. The sound carried harmonics that should not have existed in nature, undertones that Voss felt in her bones more than heard with her ears. Then we find shelter and wait it out, Torres suggested. One of the interior rooms, away from the exterior walls. Webb nodded. Agreed. Park, can you access the facility map? Park worked the frozen console, his technical expertise allowing him to navigate the compromised system. There's a research lab in the center of the complex. Module C looks like it's the most isolated location. If we're going to make a stand anywhere, that's our best bet. They moved through the corridors, surrounded on all sides by the watching eyes of the frozen crew. Voss tried not to look at them, but it was impossible. They were everywhere, suspended at all angles, defying gravity and sense. A technician floated horizontally through a wall, his body positioned as if he were swimming. A security guard stood upright in what should have been a support column, his hands pressed together in prayer or supplication. The research lab was exactly as Park had described, a large chamber in the facility's heart, circular in design, with workstations arranged around a central pillar that housed the primary servers. The walls here were thicker, the ice more opaque, though Voss could still make out vague shapes moving in its depths. Secure the entrances, Webb ordered. Anything that might give us warning if... He stopped. They all stopped. Because there, in the center of the room, was something that had not been visible on any schematic. A column of ice rose from floor to ceiling, 3 meters in diameter, perfectly cylindrical. Inside it, suspended in the exact geometric center, was a human figure. Not one of the crew. Voss could tell that immediately, because this body was different, ancient. The clothing was wrong. Furs and leather, items that had no business in a modern Arctic research station. The face was weathered, tattooed with patterns that reminded Voss of Inuit designs, but were subtly wrong. The geometry too precise, too mathematical. That's not from the base, Torres said unnecessarily. Voss approached the column, drawn by professional curiosity that overrode her fear. The figure was male, perhaps in his 40s when he had been frozen, though frozen was clearly the wrong word. Like the crew, he showed no signs of ice crystal formation, no cellular damage. His eyes were closed, but Voss had the distinct impression that he could open them at any moment. Around his neck hung a pendant made of some dark material that might have been stone or bone. It was carved with the same geometric patterns that covered his skin, spirals and angles that seemed to shift when viewed peripherally. The logs mentioned something about detecting structures in the deep ice, Voss said. Geometric formations that didn't match natural geology. What if this is connected? What if they dug down and found something they shouldn't have? Holloway had moved to one of the workstations, accessing files that had been left open. Jesus, they weren't just monitoring seismic activity. They were drilling. Look at this. Project Permafrost. Authorization level 5. They sent bore teams down 3 kilometers, following radar signatures that suggested artificial structures. And they found him, Park finished. They brought him up. Not him, Voss corrected, reading over Holloway's shoulder. SCP-6004. That's what they designated it. The logs say they extracted the specimen from a chamber buried in ice that predates the current glacial period. Ice that should be at least 2 million years old. But the specimen itself tested at 43,000 years. Radiocarbon dating was conclusive. Webb circled the column, his weapon never quite pointing at it, but never quite pointing away either. What does the documentation say it does? Voss scanned through the files, piecing together the story from fragments and technical reports. What she found made her blood run cold, in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. They didn't know, she said. The specimen was completely inert when they brought it up. No vital signs, no cellular activity, nothing to suggest it was anything other than a remarkably well-preserved corpse. They were preparing to transport it to Site 19 for further study when the seismic activity started. The ice beneath the station began to shift, rising up, as if responding to the specimen's removal. The glacier is alive, Torres said flatly. That's what you're saying. The whole damn glacier is alive and we stole a piece of it. Not alive, Voss thought, but did not say. Something else. Something that existed in a state between life and death, between frozen and active, between solid and liquid. The ice was not attacking them. It was trying to reclaim what had been taken. And in the process, it was transforming everything it touched, making it part of itself, integrating human and ice into a hybrid that could exist in both states simultaneously. The figure in the column opened its eyes. They were white, not the white of cataracts or blindness, but the white of fresh snow, of glacial ice, of the storm that raged outside. They held no iris, no pupil, just that endless white that seemed to contain depths that had nothing to do with anatomy. The figure's mouth opened. Voss heard no sound, but she felt something, a vibration that resonated in her chest, in her skull, in the ice beneath her feet. The other frozen crew members, visible through the lab's translucent walls, began to move with increased urgency. Their hands pressed harder against their barriers. Their mouths opened wider. Their eyes, all of them, had turned that same terrible white. It's calling them, Park whispered. It's calling the whole glacier. The ice beneath their feet cracked, not breaking, but shifting, rearranging itself. Voss looked down and saw shapes moving in the floor, dark forms rising from below. More bodies, more of the ancient dead, preserved in ice that had held them for millennia, now responding to the call of their progenitor. We have to put it back, Voss said. That's the only way to stop this. We have to return the specimen to where it was found. How? Holloway demanded. We don't even know exactly where that is. The bore site could be anywhere within a 3-kilometer radius. Voss pulled up the drilling logs, searching for coordinates, depth markers, anything that could guide them. There. Bore Site 7, the deepest of the exploratory shafts, had been the extraction point. The documentation included precise GPS coordinates and a detailed map of the shaft system. There's an access tunnel, she said. Module D houses the drilling equipment and the primary shaft entrance. If we can get the specimen down there, lower it back to the original depth. It might call off its glacier, Webb finished. Might. That's a lot of maybes for a plan. You have a better idea? He did not. They rigged a transport sledge from equipment in the lab, working quickly as the ice around them continued its transformation. The walls were growing thicker, closing in by centimeters every minute. The frozen crew members were now less than a meter from the surface, their features clearly visible, their mouths forming words in that silent, ancient language. Breaking the central column proved surprisingly easy. The ice shattered under a single blow from Torres's breaching tool, falling away in perfect geometric shards that dissolved into mist before hitting the floor. The specimen fell forward, and Voss caught it, shocked by how light it was, how cold. The temperature of the body was far below zero, yet it was flexible, pliant, as if the flesh had never truly frozen. They secured it to the sledge and began the journey to Module D. The facility fought them every step of the way. Corridors that had been clear 10 minutes ago were now narrowed by encroaching ice. Doorways sealed themselves with crystalline barriers that had to be broken through. The frozen crew followed their progress, moving through the walls like swimmers through water, their white eyes tracking every movement. Module D was the oldest part of the facility, the original structure around which the rest had been built. The drilling equipment stood silent and dark, but the shaft entrance remained open, a circular pit descending into absolute blackness. Emergency lights along its walls had long since failed, leaving only the faint glow of the transforming ice to illuminate the depths. The drilling logs say the original chamber is at 3,000 meters, Voss said. We can't lower it manually. We'll need to use the winch system. Park moved to the controls, but the console was dead, frozen beyond function. He swore and began manually checking the backup systems, searching for anything that still had power. While he worked, the others stood guard, watching as the ice continued its relentless advance. The walls of Module D were almost completely transparent now, and through them, Voss could see the full extent of the glacier's transformation. The entire facility was becoming part of something vast, something that extended far beyond the boundaries of Outpost Sierra. She could see structures in the ice, geometric patterns that suggested architecture, suggested purpose, suggested intelligence. The glacier was not just alive, it was aware, and it had been aware for a very, very long time. Got it, Park called out. Backup winch is still functional, battery power only, but it should be enough to lower the specimen. They attached the sledge to the winch cable, securing it with every safety line they could find. The specimen lay motionless, its white eyes staring up at them, its mouth slightly open, as if about to speak. As they prepared to lower it, Voss noticed something she had missed before. The pendant around its neck was glowing, pulsing with the same rhythm as the ice, as the seismic readings, as the heartbeat she could now feel through the floor. Wait, she said. The pendant, I think it's a key of some kind, a control mechanism. For what? Webb asked. For all of it. The glacier, the transformation, everything. She reached down and carefully lifted the pendant from the specimen's neck. The moment her fingers touched it, she understood. Not through words or thoughts, but through sensation, through knowledge that flowed directly into her mind like cold water. The glacier was not attacking. It was healing. The specimen, the original, the first, the progenitor, had been part of a community that had existed in the last ice age, a civilization that had learned to merge with the ice itself, to exist in a state between frozen and living. They had built structures in the glaciers, had created art and culture and science in a medium that most humans would consider lifeless. They had been happy. Then the ice had receded, the world had warmed, and they had chosen to sleep rather than adapt, to preserve themselves in the deep cold until the ice returned. For 40,000 years they had waited, suspended in their crystalline tombs, dreaming of the glaciers that would one day cover the earth again. The drilling had awakened one, and the glacier, vast and slow and patient, had reached up to reclaim its lost child, not understanding that in doing so, it was transforming the humans it touched, integrating them into its ancient dream. Voss looked at her team, at the fear in their eyes, at the ice creeping across their suits, and made a decision. She placed the pendant around her own neck. The cold rushed in, not painful, not freezing. It felt like coming home. Voss? Webb's voice sounded very far away. What are you doing? She could see through the ice now, could feel the presence of every frozen soul in the facility, could sense the vast awareness of the glacier itself. It was not hostile. It was confused. It was trying to help, trying to save these strange creatures that had stumbled into its domain, not understanding that humans could not exist as it did, that the transformation was killing them even as it preserved them. With the pendant, she could communicate, could explain, could negotiate. Voss sent a thought into the ice, a concept shaped by will and desperation. The specimen must return. The facility must be released. The humans must be allowed to leave. In exchange, they would seal the bore sites, would leave this place undisturbed, would mark it as forbidden in all Foundation records. The glacier considered. Time moved strangely in that consideration, seconds stretching into subjective hours. Voss felt herself beginning to change, felt the ice creeping through her tissues, felt her consciousness starting to fracture and spread into the crystalline matrix around her. Then, with a sound like breaking glass magnified 1,000 times, the glacier agreed, released. Not slowly, but all at once. The walls of Module D liquefying and running like water, draining away into cracks in the floor. The frozen crew members fell from their prisons, gasping and choking, alive but changed, their eyes still holding traces of that terrible white. Voss felt the pendant grow hot against her chest, burning away the ice that had begun to form in her veins. She stumbled, and Webb caught her, his face a mask of concern and confusion. "Lower the specimen," she managed to say. "Now, before it changes its mind." They lowered the sledge into the shaft, playing out cable meter by meter, sending the progenitor back to its long sleep. When the winch finally stopped, indicating the sledge had reached the bottom, Voss felt a sense of profound loss, as if something precious had been taken away, but also relief. The pressure in her head eased. The cold that had been creeping through her body retreated. The transformation stopped. Around them, Outpost Sierra began to revert. The ice walls dissolved, revealing the original steel and polymer beneath. The frozen crew, those who had survived, lay on the floors and against walls, weak but breathing, their bodies steaming in the impossible cold. "Seal the shaft," Webb ordered. "Use everything, concrete, steel, whatever we have. That thing never comes up again." They worked through the night while outside the storm finally began to fade. By the time the sun rose, a pale, weak thing in the Arctic sky, the bore shaft was sealed beneath 3 meters of fast-setting concrete and a steel plate welded to the floor. It would not hold forever. Nothing did, not against geological time, but it would hold long enough. The survivors were evacuated over the next 48 hours. Of the original crew of 23, 14 lived. The others remained in the ice, their bodies unrecoverable, integrated too deeply with the glacier to be extracted without killing them. The Foundation designated their location as SCP-6004-A, a containment area to be monitored but never entered. Dr. Voss wrote her report during the flight back to Site 19, her fingers still numb from the cold that had nearly consumed her. She tried to explain what she had seen, what she had felt, the vast and alien consciousness that existed in the ice. But words failed her. How could you explain a glacier that thought, a frozen civilization that dreamed, an awareness so vast and slow that human lifetimes were less than heartbeats? In the end, she marked the report as incomplete and requested reassignment to a different project. Anywhere warm, anywhere far from ice. The pendant she did not mention. It remained around her neck, hidden beneath her shirt, a weight she could not quite bring herself to remove. Sometimes late at night, she felt it pulse against her skin, felt the cold respond to its rhythm. And in those moments, she would close her eyes and see them, the ancient ones, the ice people, sleeping in their glacial tombs, dreaming of the world that had been and the world that would come again when the ice finally returned. The Foundation classified SCP-6004 as Euclid class, though Voss privately thought Keter would be more appropriate. Not because it was actively hostile, but because it was patient, because it could wait, because the glaciers would advance again eventually, and when they did, the ice would remember, would wake, would reclaim the world it had once called home. And somewhere, deep in the Arctic darkness, the glacier dreamed on.